We're here today with Acyuta-bhava, formerly Adam Elenbaas. I think I got it. Ba. Just something
Yeah,
German. Elenbaas, yes, Dutch. Okay. Of Nightlight Astrology, and he's going to do a talk at Breaking Down the Borders called "Nodes of the Moon in Ancient Astrology," which I'm very excited about. So we were talking about your name change, which has been kind of a whole identity change. And when did that come about?
Yeah, so astrologically timed, quite perfectly. Pluto was opposing the sun in my birth chart. I received initiation from my spiritual teacher in the Bhakti Yoga tradition in December of 2019. And at that time, received the name Acyuta-bhava. And so that is, it's a relinquishment of my given name and taking on of my initiated name. And that was a really big moment for me. It's been, everyone's been getting used to it, so no big deal at all if people are still like, wait, I thought you were Adam Elenbaas, So everyone's getting used to it. But yeah, it's just been a natural progression of my interest in yoga over a long period of time. My wife and I owned a yoga studio for the past 10 years and just gradually kept getting more and more involved in bhakti yoga. And eventually I was in India when I met my guru, and then gradually kind of took to studying with him more and more seriously, and then decided to take initiation. So basically, just so that people understand what that means, basically means that you're taking the vows of a monk, but that you're living a life that is, in India, the Varnashram system is designed so that at every stage of life, let's say you're a teenager, or let's say you're a married person, or let's say you're a single person, or so there's different ways in which you sort of adapt the vows of monastic life to the stage of life you're living in, which for me is family life, So it's not like a priest where you can't have a family or a spouse or something like that, and like the Catholic tradition, for example. It's a little different, but that's basically what I've done.
Hey, I'm just relieved you didn't show up in a robe. I was like, what am I going to do if he's like a guru kind of person? I am not qualified to talk to him.
I'm not qualified.
I'm just a little Pisces.
Yeah, no, me too. I'm just a little Cancer.
Well, do the nodes of the moon play any particular? Do they have any particular link to your yoga practice? Because nodes are interesting to begin with, right? And in the Hellenistic practice, I don't know a whole lot about the nodes. Can you tell us a little bit about that?
Sure, yeah. So I'll be giving a talk on the ancient nodes of the moon for this conference, which I was really glad, because I think we submitted a few different talks, and then when they chose this one, I was really glad. The nodes of the moon are mostly understood through the lens of modern evolutionary astrology,
right?
Which has taken them in a very brand new direction compared to the past several thousand years of astrology. And there's basically two different schools of thought when it comes to the nodes in traditional astrology. One comes from India, and one comes from the Western tradition, which is going to run from the Hellenistic Roman Empire through the medieval, the Persian, Arabian astrologers, medieval Europe, the Renaissance, horary astrology. So in the West, the nodes of the moon have a very, like, a fundamentally different meaning than they do in the East. But these two sets of meanings of how the nodes are used are by and large the only way in which the nodes are used, all the way up until, say, less than 100 years ago, when modern astrologers, starting really around the turn of the last century, started to explore alternative or new ideas about the nodes of the moon, primarily because they didn't know what the nodes of the moon meant. So there's a lot of really interesting textual history and evidence in modern astrology where you can see modern astrologers going like, what do these mean? We don't know.
Let's just make something up. Sorry.
yeah, basically. But I think it was, it was like Dane Rudyard, for example, was one of the, and his thinking was really symbolically sophisticated, and And then it continued developing. So I trace out in the talk, I trace out the development of the new ideas about the modern ideas about the nodes of the moon and how they developed and how they evolved, and then how they deviate from the ideas about the nodes in the West and the East that were basically the two main theoretical ways of using the nodes for the past several thousand years. And I think it's just interesting because I'm someone who, for the first 5 years of my practice, professionally, full time, was practicing kind of a combination of modern psychological astrology and evolutionary astrology. Stephen Forrest, Jeff Green, I really cut my teeth on evolutionary astrology and still have a lot of appreciation for it. But because my practice shifted, and now I'm practicing Hellenistic astrology, and I dabble around with Indian astrology as well. My use of the nodes has changed significantly, and what I find most interesting is not like, oh hey, toss that out, go back to the traditional way or the Indian way or something like that, but just, isn't it interesting how very different these essentially three views are: the modern take on the nodes, the Indian take, and the traditional Hellenistic take. And by comparing and contrasting them with chart examples and with deeper understanding of how these differences took place and how the different practices diverged over time, I just feel like my practice has grown a lot more mature in it, and I can understand and appreciate the nodes in a much deeper way than I used to be able to.
I have some concern with the nodes since Pluto, which I'm supposed to ignore as a Hellenistic astrologer, is sitting right on my North Node right now. So I'll probably be at your talk because I don't know what to make of that. Although, my life's changing, but it's always changing. So nothing new about that.
Well, I think that there's, I mean, I'm not going to tell you what to think or not think, but I would tell my students in my Hellenistic courses that, I practice with the outer planets every day in my practice. So I still use them. So I think they have great symbolic value, and figuring out how to use them and how they make sense alongside of Hellenistic astrology is quite a process for some people. For example, for me, I took a few years of removing the outer planets from my practice and then put them back in. And I think that's almost maybe the best way. That's what I have my students do. I have them take them out for a year, and then in the second year program I teach, they put them back in. And I find that sometimes when you're learning ancient astrology, taking them out temporarily, but then putting them back in, it's like an elimination diet. You can really see what certain things in your diet do to you, good or bad, when you take them out for a little bit. So that's what I encourage. But anyway, to think about the nodes, a brief way of understanding, which might be interesting for people, like a teaser for the talk, is that in ancient Western astrology, the north node of the moon basically just means increase. Anything that grows or proliferates. It's like Jupiter. And the south node is going to represent decrease or diminishment or decline or decay, like Saturn. So
the dragon's head and the dragon's tail.
Right. And those symbols, that's really very flexible. Like I always use this example, you don't want a tumor to grow, right? You want it to decrease. So sometimes decrease can be a really good thing, and sometimes increase can be a really bad thing. And ancient astrologers basically had that view of the nodes, that they were increase and decrease, but for evil or for good, depending on the circumstance in the chart. And then in India, the basic view that we'll be, kind of unpacking in this talk will be, that the north node of the moon was symbolic of appetite. So consumption in a material sense, whether it's like I want to consume knowledge, or I want to consume food, or I want to gain wealth, but it was hunger and appetite, and it's driving and perpetuating reincarnation by virtue of staying entangled in material desire, and called Rahu. And then the south node of the moon, Ketu, has to do with the intense desire to be free from pain, suffering, and entanglement in the world, but usually in a very complicated and not entirely benefic way. For example, the heroin addict may shoot up because they feel it's very painful to be in the world, or someone who drinks a lot, or someone who shops a lot to escape, you
Hmm.
know? So the signature of wanting to get further entangled versus trying to escape, both for the Indian astrologers are a bit like, your fingers in one of those, they used to be called Chinese finger traps. You get them at
Yeah,
like the
little
carnivals.
little straw things.
Yeah. And if you try to reach enlightenment through the impulse to escape the pain, or through if you try to reach some form of satisfaction through trying to consume and satisfy, gratify your senses, both are dead ends. So for Indian astrologers, both the nodes of the moon are malefic.
Yes.
But there are ways that both the nodes can be guided toward or dovetailed with spiritual life. So they're not, and in both traditions, really, it's kind of, um, they're very contextually specific, the way that you end up reading them. So I unpack a bunch of charts in this talk to show people how the context of these ideas that I've just briefly given you a definition of can be seen and understood in a bunch of different charts.
That's brilliant. I really love that. That they're both malefic, so you're actually working against yourself if you're fully engaged with either node or indulging in either node. Well, can you give us an
Yeah.
example of something you might tell us in your talk without giving you one of the talk examples, without giving us one of the talk examples?
Yeah, sure. So uh, let me think about this for just a second.
Sure.
Yeah. So for example, let's say that I just did a chart demo on my YouTube channel not long ago, and in this demo, I had a client who, let's just compare and contrast this chart example with the modern view of the nodes. So the modern view of the nodes in evolutionary astrology, a quote from Stephen Forrest's website. You can just pull this right off his website describing what is evolutionary astrology. North node of the moon is your homework. It's what you're here to do and what you're
Mhm.
here to improve upon, or the test that you're being given, or something like that. And the south node is your old hangups, and maybe to some extent the things you've mastered already, but the stuff you're now trying to let go of in favor of cultivating what the north node points you to. And sometimes, I mean, he jokingly in one article on his website says the north node is the meeting, the south node is the bottle. So there's this sense that, if you need medicine, your north node is your medicine and your south node is your poison. And that view pervades modern astrology. Most people understand the nodes of the moon through that particular lens. Now, again, I let people decide on their own which view makes most sense to them. For me, I had to switch over to the more traditional view, and I've used both the Eastern and Western in my practice, but let's just compare and contrast these two views in a chart example that I just did on my YouTube channel. So in this chart, the woman had south node of the moon sitting right on the descendant in the 7th house, north node of the moon sitting right on the ascendant, exactly opposite, in the 1st house. So this is pretty classic. Modern evolutionary astrology would say, maybe and I'm just making this up there because modern evolutionary astrologers could tell quite a variety of different stories about this nodal axis. But the south node of the moon in the 7th might represent a tendency to get hung up in certain types of relationships or relationship
Mhm.
dynamics,
Yeah.
with the evolutionary homework being to individuate,
Yes.
to become more self-sufficient, right? So that's the basic read of that house axis with the nodes. Well, let's just say from a traditional Indian perspective, let's use that one. By contrast, in this type of chart, the south node of the moon would maybe represent the feeling of that, being on one's own is difficult and painful and entangling. And so
Mhm.
one says, you know what, it's too hard. I'm going to seek a marriage. I'm going to seek a relationship, and the relationship will offer me some form of salvation. You know, the north node of the moon in the meantime says, no, 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 I've got to be on my own. I've got to be independent. I've got to be strong, and there's a hunger to cultivate that, right? Both are
Mhm.
being done from the Indian standpoint. Both motivations are coming from the inherent feeling of not being happy or at home in the soul. And so the lifetime will be defined by the push and pull between these two contrary ways of dealing with the underlying dissatisfaction. And you know, so in that sense, there's not one of the two would not necessarily be better than the other. So in the case of this client who let me share her chart on my YouTube channel, she had grown up in a family where, you know, dad was quite controlling. Saturn happened to be the ruler of the fourth house and the seventh. And so you have, well, and this was by exaltation. It was exaltation. It was ruler of the seventh, and in its exaltation in the fourth house, which is the house of the father in traditional astrology.
Answer.
So, you know, so she had quite a very successful father, was exalted Saturn, you know, disciplined, hardworking, but very restrictive as well, as one might imagine. So of course she had a couple of marriages that resembled her father, successful guys who were controlling. And in both cases, she ended up getting out of both marriages and trying to become more independent, going back to school, becoming a single parent, you know, taking care of her kids, becoming financially self-sufficient. But then she would feel deeply alone and unsatisfied and would go back to a relationship. So the tendency is going to be, in my experience anyway, is going to be for a modern evolutionary astrologer would be to say, um, you know, basically you keep falling back into relationships because you're not passing the test, which is to be truly independent and self-sufficient. But I found that doesn't really tell the full story. That when we look carefully at what the progenitors of the whole science of karma had to say about the nodes, the Indian astrologers, they said, no, what we really want is to try and help a person understand that tendency to be polarized within yourself between thinking that being independent and self-sufficient is going to bring you happiness, or this other extreme of being married and not having to worry about your problems because the marriage will take care of it, that both of those are extremes within yourself. They're two sides of the same coin.
Right.
And addressing that complex as a whole would be more of the karmic dynamic in Indian astrology.
I'm glad
Western
you said
astrology,
that because it sounded
yeah,
like there was no way out in India astrology. You're trapped in this life of, you know, one side of the conflict or the other side of the conflict. But the trick
yeah,
is to understand them and be aware of both of those poles. Yes.
yeah, that's right, because it would be it really would be short-sighted of us to tell such a person, at least from the standpoint of looking at the nodes through the Indian tradition, it would be really short-sighted of us to tell a person that becoming self-sufficient will satisfy you. And it would be really short-sighted to tell someone that, you know, getting into a relationship will solve all of your problems. Um, in Indian astrology, it's really simple. The only thing that solves all of your problems is yoga. and like yoga, of course, yoga is a
Interesting.
word that has a lot of different meanings. Its basic meaning is
To
to
join.
yoke,
To
to
join.
join. So we want to join the soul, the heart, to our source, and we that's a so in other words, it's the shift of our consciousness that is the practice that saves us from that feeling, or at least it changes our relationship to the difficulties of life, such that even when we ride the inevitable ups and downs of fortune, which remember, these are the nodes of the moon, and the moon was the planet of fortune in the Western
Hmm.
tradition. And the fortune is the great wheel, the great turning of life, of, you know, just like the sun rises and sets and the Nile floods and then it recedes. So there's times of abundance and there's times of poverty and there's times of happiness and times of grief, and that cycle, that endless wheel of fortune was represented by the moon, who is always changing, whose path was, you know, a serpentine path around
Mhm.
the straight line of the ecliptic. So yoga is really teaching us how to find some center of consciousness that's unchanging and blissful and, you know, peaceful and knowledgeable, uh, to accompany us through the ups and downs. And the ups and downs aren't bad. They're only bad in a sense to the extent that we haven't changed our consciousness in relationship to them. So I think that the remedy in Indian astrology for the nodes of the moon is much different. In modern evolutionary astrology, the remedy is go do your north node. In
Yes.
Indian astrology, the remedy is go do yoga, you know, because that's going to
Which
change your
is
relationship
all
with
about
everything.
balance, right?
Yeah,
Yoga is about balance. At least my yoga is, even though
yeah,
I'm not very good at it.
yeah.
Well,
Well,
that's
yeah,
good. I was thinking you were going to tell me the solution to your nodes is better luck next life.
yeah, maybe.
Well,
But yeah,
this is going to be a fascinating talk. So you're going to bring in the nodes both from the perspective of Western astrology and Eastern astrology, and give us a new viewpoint on that. I have a new viewpoint just from our talk today. I mean, you kind of changed my life. So
oh,
I'm gonna
great.
I'm gonna I'm gonna be at your talk on November 7th. It's at 3:30 to 5 p.m. and that is Eastern Standard Time. All talks are Eastern Standard Time. And I want to let you know that we also have a foyer. I helped with the first Breaking Down the Borders conference, whenever that was, and a couple of times I have hosted the foyer. I've been like the hostess, but the foyer is a place where people can gather, your students can come, or just conference attendees can come in between classes and just hang out and chat, and they can, you know, share what they've learned. And it's great when the presenters come and they can answer questions and talk there too. It makes it more like a real conference, which I know we all miss so much, being
Yeah,
together.
totally.
You know?
Yeah, we just did that for the Great Lakes Astrology Conference online. We had like a little waiting room area. That was pretty cool.
Yeah, I think we started that. I'm taking credit.
Okay. Yeah, totally.
So,
Go for it. I don't
so
know the whole history.
is this your first time to talk with Breaking Down the Borders?
Yeah, it is. I'm really excited.
Yeah, it's a great conference. So Nodes of the Moon in Ancient Astrology, November 7th, 3:30 to 5 p.m. And Acyuta also has a YouTube channel called Nightlife Astrology, Nightlight Astrology, let me say that right, and a website, I guess. And you teach classes, you said.
Yeah, yeah. My website's nightlightastrology.com, and I have a first year, second year Hellenistic astrology course, and then I have a horary astrology course as well. So people could check that out. And if anyone has any questions, they can email me. My email address is info@nightlightastrology.com.
Cool. Well, thanks so much for talking to us today.
Thank
I'm
you.
not sure. I'm not sure when this will be up, but it works. It really helps students get a taste of what they'll learn in your class, and so and you'll be given a copy to promote as well. But
Cool. Yeah.
I thank you for talking to me today.
Yeah, thank you for having me. Well, I'll wait to hear from you guys about the video, and I'll definitely spread it around.